all that is to say, it's an exciting time to be talking about GEO. There's a lot going on. I think it's also something that's easy to start feeling overwhelmed by. And I think that's really the point where we're going to start today is we're going to start just sort of with the biggest circle we can. And I'd like to offer my perspective on how we start tackling this as marketers and really getting our head around not just the technology, but for what it sort of means and how um, we as brands interact with our audiences. So, we're going to keep it high level. I'm going to try to separate out a little bit of the noise from the signal to the best that I can, although it's a daunting job. Um, but all of us have bosses, and all of us have people we report to who are asking us to be on top of this kind of stuff. I know that's where this started for me. Hi, Christine. And so I hope that at very least everybody who can walk will walk away here today with at least a high level way to sort of have this conversation with the people you report up to, the people you sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with, and up and down your organization, really about, do we need to be worried, right? Like, or do we need to freak out? Spoiler, no, we don't. We don't need to freak out. I think there's some major changes happening, but they are happening. I think there's plenty of opportunity for us to anticipate those changes and start laying some groundwork. But as is often the case in our world of B2B, nothing quite happens overnight. So I've been talking for a long time without answering these questions. So thank you for bearing with me. My name's Edward. I'm a principal and strategy practice lead at R plus M. We're a brand consultancy based out of Raleigh. I'm in Virginia. And what we do is we work with B2B companies and help them align strategy and story and behavior, because that alignment is what really has to happen for anything of importance to happen within an organization or without, right? And really our secret weapon is brand. It's a tool every organization has, every organization understands at least to some degree. Our view of the world, my gospel that I preach is for most B2B companies, whether on the revenue side or at the CEO level, brand is not doing all it could be. So we sort of help people make their brand work a little harder to align more with, that stuff, things like revenue ops and at the C and the executive level, strategic planning and follow through, of course. And we call all that brand-led growth. So I'm going to take a little bit of a sidetrack of that today. I bring that up to make it plainly clear that I'm not a tech guy. I don't design, I don't write code. I'm not an SEO person. In fact, I maybe even have a little bit of an unfair chip on my shoulder about SEO. But the reason I have been interested in GEO and where R plus M has been leaning in with our partners is the case I'm going to try to make today, and I think the facts support it, is that the highest level understanding we need to have about GEO is it's not really a technology story at all. It is a brand story at its core, and just bear with me, and I'll talk it out. So I think the other thing that is important for us is that it is going to cause some disruption. So I think both the framework and the disruptive components are really what I'm going to focus on today. We'll get a little bit in the weeds on some of the tech stuff, but again, that's not my bailiwick. That sort of extends from our team, but I'll try to share a little bit of how we are operationalizing some of this thinking with our partners right now to give you a glimpse of sort of what this looks like in practice. But we'll keep it high level. Okay, first things first. GEO, like every groovy marketing innovation of the 21st century and probably prior, is already beginning to suffer from a multitude uh, yeah, of buzzwords, right? And if we really get into the weeds, some of the differences are significant, but really for our own comprehension, for us approaching this from the outside, I'm going to use GEO to sort of stand for all of the ways that AI and agentic search are changing the behavior of our customers and how our brands need to show up. And there's, of course, lots of granularity in between, but I don't think we're going to get there today. Okay, so first, let's get to the tension. For 30 plus years, right? SEO was a game that we could play, right? We could optimize our pages with keywords. We could publish content regularly leaning on those keywords, and we would see our rank rise if we just were willing to put in the effort and the energy. It was something we felt like we could control. GEO, probably for most of us, feels like those rules are changing. And I think the key reality that we need to face is visibility can't really be purchased or engineered in the same one-to-one way that we saw in SEO. You know, what that means for us as marketers, where it gets daunting, is now this kind of idea of visibility and showing up is now in this area of needing to be earned, which makes it feel a lot more ambiguous. So I think that ambiguity is one of the things we struggle with because, again, SEO is pretty straightforward. But what does this mean when we're in someplace else? And I think primarily the thing we are all either aware of or hopefully not seeing for the first time, but probably starting to understand is that GEO, ultimately agentic search, is going to disrupt the sales funnel as we know it. All of the familiar stages that we know and love, awareness and consideration and decision, of course they don't disappear because those funnel stages correspond to human behavior. It's just the humans are doing different things, and our ability to see what they're doing is going to change. And really, in effect, what that means is all of these things from our perspective as marketers who are tracking are going to appear to collapse into this kind of single, blended and unpredictable moment inside the AI experience, right? Not on our website where we can see it. AI is in some cases is doing the clicking on it for our customers, right? Scary stuff. But going back to the human part of this, right? People, even B2B buyers who are part of a large buying committee making a 6 or 7 figure decision, right? Even at that high level, they're still going to do the things people do. They're still evaluating options. They're still, um, having to get educated. But the change that we will see, and it's most important to us, is a lot of that evaluation is not going to happen on your website anymore, which means for us marketers, we lose that nice digital analytics footprint that has allowed us that we've counted on in our reports and in our dashboards. So, what does that mean? It means, if those numbers are starting to change, we risk appearing invisible both sort of in the market and to the people we are accountable for within our organization. So, I'm going to start by just unpacking a little bit more about what's changing and why that matters for us. Okay, so probably by now you have all seen what your search pages are looking like. And this is me throwing in what is GEO, which is I didn't start that far behind when I got this presentation rolling, but just as an example, what we see in the top half of this screen is all AI generated summaries, right? These are previews, they are citations. We have a people also ask section. Um, you know, in effect, what's different from before is the search engine, the AI agent, has done the reading for us and synthesized it. And that's a big change. And I don't know if you could see it way down at the bottom with this arrow, but there it is. That is our top organic result that I'm sure, who is that down there? I can't even read Forbes. I'm sure Forbes has worked very diligently to earn. But as you can see, that real estate has probably diminished in value somewhat. So SEO still matters technically, but it certainly does not guarantee the visibility in the way it once did. And arguably, does it command the same credibility? Or at the very least, it means more work. I can have the AI do my reading for me up top, or I can click through this Forbes article and figure out what they're trying to say on my own and make that decision on what I have time to do and what I have the energy to do. So this starts to show us sort of in the real world what this shift looks like for a user, for the people we are trying to reach. Here's a quick example, right? That's West. Hi, West. He has been an intrepid follower of his brother into BMX racing, and he wants to get a pedal bike, of course, which means I have to figure out what to buy him. And I don't know anything about that stuff. So what did I do? In the past, I would have done what we've all probably done before, typed in some kind of Google search that as a savvy user of the internet, I know how to optimize to get what I'm looking for, opened, 5 or 6 different tabs for different brands and tried my best to kind of compare apples and oranges. But what I have now is the AI is doing all that for me in an instant. It's happening within this AI conversation. I ask my question. AI is synthesizing an answer for me. It's giving me options. it's also taking into account the stuff I've asked before. So all the questions I had learning about this stuff with my 8-year-old, it's bringing it with it, and using that to shape the experience I have. So my AI agent here, the AI that's doing the searching on my behalf, isn't just synthesizing information. It's tailoring those answers based on what it knows about me, which is head and shoulders above the kind of cookies and customization that we're used to in the SEO world. So what does this mean for me if I'm a buyer? As I'm going through this information, I'm not just getting educated. The AI is sort of pre-qualifying me, right? I'm going to be further along in my understanding in that buyer journey when I do pull the trigger on one of these webs on one of these purchases, and it's all happening instantaneously, right? I'm not going through the steps. So when we talk about funnel collapse, that's kind of what it looks like. Spoiler alert: I did not buy a bike online. I ran into a friend who knows way more about this stuff, and he gave me one of his old bikes. So when I talk about the sky is not falling, I mean that for us in B2B world, we certainly have some of our early adopters out there, but B2B buying and decision making doesn't quite move in lockstep with the speed of technology. So again, take all of this with a grain of salt. Those human interactions, those human relationships still matter. Your sales team is still closing the deal, but what is happening before that deal starts is now in flux a bit. Last thing to point out is you might notice that all these screen grabs are not from a web browser. So I didn't touch any websites. I did all this work outside of that environment. Um, this one's hot off the presses, actually. This is something I included just for you guys today because I just read about it this week. But getting out of the hypothetical, getting into the real, LinkedIn recently shared that their non-brand B2B traffic dropped by as much as 60%, even though their SEO rankings remain stable. And I think this is a key point for us to think about as we understand the difference between kind of old SEO world and the new. Their SEO is working fine. Their rankings didn't collapse. But the click-through rate, which, hey, who doesn't want a click-through rate, started to soften. And the reason for that is some of the information that the users were looking for, they found it in their AI summary. They didn't need to go to the website, even though, logically they got the same information and were satisfied. So when we see something like that as marketers looking at our dashboard, traffic can drop, rank holds. We know that we're not just looking at an SEO, an optimization issue. This is really a structural change in how buyers and users are doing discovery. And I hope I have not beaten that dead horse, but we're all interested in demand gen. We're all interested in the top of the funnel. We all want to own that. And I think this is one of the first places that GEO makes us need to think a little bit different. So yeah, the kind of old paradigm of rank, click, visit, convert was sort of out the door, and AI has had, and LinkedIn has changed its behavior. It's a pretty interesting case study. Okay, so second part of the disruption, right? Sales funnel behavior is going to get disrupted, but for us, the scary part is how we measure that behavior is also disrupted. And I think I've teed up some of those ideas here, but we'll drill down a little bit just to get specific. All the stuff that we know and love, our traffic, our bounce rate, our time on site, they start to lose some of their value when again, that journey is happening outside of our website, right? The same informational transaction is happening. We just don't get to have it in our space anymore. So what is that going to mean? It's going to mean our dashboards, like LinkedIn saw, are going to show less activity. Our attribution models are going to get fuzzier, right? Our referral traffic might just start to get weird, even if like direct traffic spikes. So again, it's going to kind of turn our dashboards a little bit on their heads. And so what we're going to need to do as marketers, or people in charge of marketers, is make sure that we evolve. But I think the silver lining here, when we come out of this, and again, why me as a brand guy finds this so interesting, is that GEO ultimately is going to force us to measure things that actually matter, right? Things like trust, things like relevance, things like value, all the things that good brands strive for and that good brands have, that occasionally in the SEO world took a backseat to sort of the more tactical SEO and keyword stuff that was a little more direct. So, like I said, If we think about things like trust, relevance, and value, those of us managing brands, these things, this new reality starts to feel familiar. It feels a little bit more aligned with our general work. Okay, that's the heavy stuff. Everybody still here? Good. Take a breath. Okay. I think here's the good news, right? SEO still is dominating search, right, in the B2B world. LinkedIn is just, they have a compelling interest to be ahead of the curve. Um, you know, we can predict out an inflection point in a few years. This might move. But I think for us, sort of coming back to our stakeholders in our companies and sort of making our recommendation on what we need to do about GEO now, I think this gives us some good perspective. It means we are not tearing the house down. So by all means, keep your SEO healthy, but look at how you can strengthen your credibility, how you can be more clear with your content, how you can be more consistent with creating that content. And again, I think the winning strategy here is more about foresight than urgency. So we've got some time. All right. Now I'm going to try to get through what I feel like are the core concepts we all need to understand about GEO to really start to think about what our action plan is going to be. And I think that I've probably teased this already, but the main thing we have to understand is that sorry, the worst mistake we can make, how about that? Is thinking that GEO is just Google with different rankings, because that's going to fundamentally miss what's happening below the surface, which means our solution is going to land us someplace else, right? The mechanics are fundamentally different. Search engines are scanning the web. They're matching keywords to index pages. It's a one-to-one thing. GEO engines read, but they also synthesize, they put things together, they infer intent based on past behavior and interaction with the search engine. They are evaluating meaning. They are looking for context from the user. They are looking to surface credibility and also determine credibility with their robot brain. So they're sort of way below the surface of just the kind of metadata simplicity that we saw in SEO. Metadata is still going to come back as a character here today. I'll get to that shortly. So, for GEO, what does that mean? Instead of ranking pages, these models are looking to build answers by pulling from the sources that they trust, right? Um, they're not just asking in kind of their simple way, I will show who has optimized the best based on this keyword query. They're asking whose explanation is the most reliable and relevant to the user, the individual user I'm serving, right? The AI agent is working on behalf of the user. So that's why being part of the AI's answer, being retrieved, as we call it, is going to start having much more weight than just being ranked. Retrieval is the new sort of paradigm we need to think about versus just ranking. Um, I would say that on top of that, um, what we have to understand is if the AI model doesn't recognize your expertise, it's not going to pull you into your reasoning. So again, keyword used to be the criteria, and now it's expertise. And I think we can all feel that that's kind of like going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, or maybe even four. It's an order of magnitude more complex. Um, so where we need to start thinking is um, the visibility tactics that we've been rewarded for so long in SEO is not the reward we're going to get from GEO. We need to start thinking about things like clarity, um, credibility, and consistency, right? Again, things good brands already do. Okay. Um, there we go. So let's take a little deeper look of sort of um, what are some of these mechanics that are changing, right? Um, I don't want to hammer this home too much, but search engines are different. They work different. They think different. They sort of barely think, right? AI agents are not just retrieving information, they are putting something together for me, right? They are synthesizing facts into answers based on what it thinks I want. We talked about search terms. That's sort of SEO. That's the kind of two-dimensional thing. 3 dimensions is the user intent, not just what I'm asking, but what I'm really trying to do. And I think there's a huge difference in how we set up the information that corresponds to that. And then finally, highest rank on the page, as we saw a few slides back with Forbes. they're still number one, but that beachfront property now has like a condo in front of it or something, you know? So really the metric we need to be chasing is around authority. And I will come back to that word. That is why it's an orange. That is a secret code. Authority is going to be a very important idea for us to understand. So it's a big shift mentally, mechanically, across the board. All right. We touched on this earlier, but the legacy metrics we've depended on won't just start to dip, they're going to tell us less. And I think that's even more important. So we're not going to, it's not when we see some of those numbers drop, it doesn't mean our performance is going down. It means our ability to see our success is diminishing if we are using the same metrics. So what we're going to need to think about are some new ways to measure our effectiveness here. And right, what does that look like? Um, you know, traffic, right? Traffic used to be sort of it. That's our highest level. It was who's coming to our site. Now we need to start thinking about, are we showing up in these answers that AI is generating, right? That's not even happening on our website. Instead of sessions on your page, we need to start looking at stuff like retrieval frequency. How often are these AI engines pulling us into those answers? And how much of those answers do we capitalize? Do we own the share of? It's sort of our share of voice, you might think about it in these AI responses. And it's a very different kind of visibility, right? Um, Kind of next, going down the line, time on site, right? This one is going to get even noisier and sort of fuzzier when we are thinking about the zero-click world that I showed when I was looking for that bicycle. I did a lot of my work and I never visited a website. I learned a lot, I read a lot, and that none of that happened on any of the owned channels by these brands. And so when we're looking at our sort of engagement, time on page gets hard for us to show that as our value. People might never even reach your site, even if they're engaging with your ideas. So if you're measuring the wrong thing, you're losing track of where you might actually be successful. So we have to look beyond just how long did they kind of linger on our page. We have to look for offsite engagement, the likes, the shares, the saves, the reposts, and also the discussions happening kind of across the entire ecosystem that we exist in, where we are mentioned, right? These are the kind of signals that can tell us that our ideas are resonating, even if those interactions aren't kind of happening on our home turf, on our website. And then here's the big one, right? Conversion paths. All those beautiful attribution journeys that we've worked so hard on and fine tune and deliver our MQLs up to, they're going to kind of start to fade, right? Because the journey is going to be happening in places that we can't see. Um, so we have to, again, get out of our own space and get back into thinking about ecosystem recognition, right? How do we show up across the entire online space where we might exist? Are we being cited in those AI answers, as we talked about before? Are we being mentioned in articles that are third party? Are we being referenced by our partners? Are we being featured in the media? Um, these are kind of new signals that we need to start to understand as really showing our influence and that this is working. And I think a lot of this probably looks pretty uncomfortable if you are managing a dashboard out there somewhere. I feel you. The data is going to start to feel thinner, and our dashboards are going to feel less certain. But as I said before, it's gonna ultimately be more honest about how effective we are showing up online because the signals that we're measuring aren't just measuring a click, they're measuring basically the trust that we have earned, which is what we want, which is what moves people down that pipeline. This is a new one. I just added today, but just to add a little bit more specificity of what are some of the metrics that we actually might start looking at. And this is sort of kind of bleeding edge for us. It's new. I can talk a little bit more about this towards the end if we want. But one would be something like visibility rate, right? How often does your brand appear inside those AI generated answers for priority queries, right? Think about it as like retrieval frequency, across a defined set of prompts, like job to be done or competitive set, something like that. You can measure this using some of these emerging AI visibility tools that are happening out there. You can even do it manually. You can track prompts yourself if you open up ChatGPT and Gemini and your Perplexity or and sort of see how you're ranking across the platforms. I mean, especially if you're a mid-sized company, probably a few dozen queries will probably give you a great visibility of how you're showing up. The next would be citation share, right? This is how often, what percentage of your brand are you showing up in mentions relative to your competitors in AI responses, right? If five vendors are showing up in the answers that you appear in, and in like 1 out of 10 prompts, that's a signal. That tells you something, right? And we can still, again, there's some tools coming out. I'm a little dubious on those again for the kind of moment in time we're in. I think just some manual desk work is a good way to start to get a ballpark figure of where you stand here. Um, so another one would be AI overview, your win rate in the AI overview, right? So this is for Google specifically. This looks at how often is your content cited or linked within that AI interview, that box that, it's like somewhat kind of in SERP land, for your target queries, the things that you want to rank for and have authority for. There's some monitoring tools that probably similar to what you're monitoring your SEO for. And then again, good old-fashioned manual SERP testing. We've all done it, I'm sure. And then finally, referral traffic from the LLM. This one is actually a little bit more concrete because I know you're all feeling like I'm giving you a ton of homework. But you can track your referral traffic, as you probably already are, by the domains it's coming from, right? The ChatGPT, the Perplexity, the Gemini, or other AI environments that are popping up in your analytics. This won't capture everything, right? But like I said, because a lot of stuff's happening without that click, but it will sort of give you approximate understanding of when those AI answers are sending, these high intent visitors your way. I mean, just think about how much information I was given about buying that junior BMX bike before I had to click anywhere. By the time I click on, let's see, uh, GT's website, I'm pretty darn committed as a buyer. So I'm pretty darn advanced. So in that case, like I have been like extra qualified. I showed up to that website more qualified than I would have been otherwise, thanks to my AI agent, right? But yeah, I think that the takeaway here is this data is still emerging. There's really not, as I've seen, I mean, I could be wrong as of today, as of next week, kind of a universal dashboard for this, but I don't think that means we have to wait for that to happen. We can sort of define and understand our priority prompts, right? We can kind of monitor some of the trends that are important to us, particularly on the revenue side. We can compare our relative visibility to our competitive set. Um, and then the visibility here is could be seen as a leading indicator, right, of future demand. Um, because as it all comes back, even as those on-site metrics decline, that doesn't mean that our influence is declining as well. We just need to find it in other ways and in other places. Okay, last one. I think we've touched on this before, but yeah, this is probably a big shift for all of us in the B2B marketing, I think, as well, as I'm currently engaged in a number of website projects right now. But yeah, your website becomes one signal, not the signal. And I think that's a tough one because we've invested a lot in our website. We put a lot of time into our website. We run heat mapping to make sure we understand where people are clicking on our website and all that groovy stuff. And our website is the place we get to control fully, where our brand gets to be its uncompromised self. But the reality is, at least for much of their buying journey, they may never land on your homepage. But the AI still needs to know who you are. It needs to know what you stand for and needs to know why you're credible. Once again, these are all things that your brand provides that your SEO strategy did not provide. So we need to understand how to make our brand recognizable even when the website isn't in the room, right? Oh, that's a weird metaphor. I don't think your website would be in a room. Let's make a note to change that next time. I won't say that again. But yeah, if you are showing up in a realer sense, if you're showing up in articles, if you show up in product reviews, being cited by thought leadership, of course, blue white papers, if you're being listed, if your leadership is on podcasts, if you are posting on LinkedIn, right? Or providing any sort of other expert commentary, what the AI is going to see is a pattern of expertise that is not directly tied to your website. And that's what That's what we want to establish. We want them to understand that this brand shows up consistently no matter where they are, and that people trust what this brand says, right? And again, that trust, you can say whatever you want on your own website as long as legal clears it. But when you're on somebody's podcast, I think we all know that sort of that bar of what you say and what you want to be on the hook for claiming becomes higher. It's a higher trust environment, and the AI recognizes that. So again, once your buyers are making decisions off your website, um, the only thing that's going to keep you in the conversation is whether both the human side and the AI is going to recognize you as a trusted source. Okay. And that's where we're headed next. Let's talk about that trust. Let's talk about authority. Okay, here's my most gimmicky thing I have to say today. You gotta let me off the hook. I couldn't help myself. If I'm contributing to the noise, forgive me, but I think this is really what all of us should understand is visibility was the thing we used to chase. Authority is the thing we now need to chase, right? This is, like I said, if buyers are discovering and evaluating and deciding outside of your website, then you got to be there. You got to be visible, whether your brand has to be trusted wherever that AI is looking. That's the shift, right? Um, I think the critical thing is visibility is no longer something you own. I said this earlier, it's something you earn. What does that look like? Um, it's because the GEO engines are relying on the signals of credibility that you're sending to decide who is getting included in that answer. If you're trusted by the AI and by humans, you get retrieved. If you're retrieved, you are then visible. So I think that link is pretty direct. Um, not to pick on SEOs so much because I really don't mean to, but visibility used to be something we could manufacture kind of tactically. Authority really has to happen across our entire presence. And I mean, SEO, we're talking about our own website. Um, you know, GEO makes us we have to think more broadly about our ecosystem. So this idea of authority is great because it's a way for us to think about how we show up everywhere, not just how we make one asset visible. And again, that's probably the key shift we need to understand. Let's break this down a little bit more because authority, I think, really is an important word. It's one used by at least by Google right now, and I think it's the one I want to hang my hat on. And really, how I would define it is authority is trust earned at scale over time, right? It's the signal that you're giving that tells both, this is critical, people and the AI that your brand is reliable enough to include, cite, or recommend to its users to trust. And the key word here is it's got to be earned, right? You can't trick your way in. We talked about that. So the goal here is we have to be consistent. We have to have a clear point of view, and we need to demonstrate some proof that other people find that work valuable. I think, again, all of these things are key attributes that a strong brand already has. And now we are looking to operationalize those attributes within this GEO environment. On your website, for instance, excuse me, um, your authority shows up in like the way you explain things, how your content is structured, whether the language is clear, whether you've got the right FAQs. Do you have some, expert explainers of your product or your process? Do you have case studies? Do you have ungated resources, right? AI cannot scan, it cannot index or not index, I guess. It cannot pull from that blue chip content that you've got behind your paywall or behind your lead gen capture. So if your most valuable piece of content that is the crystallization of all your expertise is invisible to AI because you are using it to generate leads, then you've got a trade-off to consider. Off your website, like I said, your authority comes from everywhere that you need to show up and that your users are showing up, everywhere your ideas travel, right? So what do we need to do? Yeah, AI, this authority is sort of the word that helps us understand that. And I want to break that again. Like I said, authority is trust earned over time. And I want to dig one level deeper into authority because I think this is about as technical as I want to get today, but we have to understand authority in two dimensions. Okay. There's the human facing side and the machine facing side. And they're somewhat separate and somewhat not separate, which is nice and confusing, I know. But let's start with the human one, right? That's the one that should be familiar and pretty intuitive to us. It's things like having our point of view and having our expertise clearly communicated. It's about our overall reputation. It's about how we show up in the various channels that our buyers and our users are using. When we go over to kind of authority for the AI, that is a little bit more technical, right? It's looking at things like your structured data. It's looking at open access. It's basically making sure your content is machine readable. And there's certain types of content that agentic AI prefers, um, including FAQs, making sure that that schema markup is tight and aligned with kind of the new visibility signs and overall consistent. Um, and I mentioned this before about the gated content, but when we see stuff like um, trying to get your authority on other sources, if that authority is showing up on media outlets that are paywalled, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, BBC, they don't let the AI in. So you're getting the visibility on the one hand, but you're not getting credit. You're getting probably human visibility, but you're not getting AI visibility. And this is some of the nuance that we have to understand when we're tailoring our authority strategy. So ultimately, you need both. What did I forget? There's something New York Times. Oh, so yes, paywall stuff, right? It's a technology roadblock for the AI. It's a new development. It's happening. However, on the other hand, where AI is looking for things that it can get into are places that are sort of on the one hand make sense, but might be a little new for some of us, especially in the B2B space. But like we see a disproportionate number of citations coming from like Reddit, coming from YouTube comments, coming from Wikipedia, places that the AI can access, right? That's not paywalled. I think especially for us in B2B land, these niche blogs and trade websites, I think that's another place to look. So again, this is a conversation to have with your media and PR team is everybody wants those blue chip placements, and those blue chip placements have value, but we can't rely on those exclusively to be our credibility and our authority. Okay. Once again, I'm going to hammer this home today, but the reason this is a challenge for, I think, SEO minded people and an opportunity for brand minded people is there's really no shortcut, right? And there's really not even a rule book. Um, we had a kind of a rule book for SEO. GEO doesn't exactly want us to understand how it works. That's kind of their business model. We're going to be a little bit at the mercy of it, but I think there's some patterns that we can understand. Um, I think the good news is we don't really need a formula either. Um, if we act like a good brand, if we show up consistently, we're going to get authority. So I'm going to break down maybe some areas for us to think about, kind of some general buckets to focus on. But I think we have to get out of the habit of sort of thinking of these as ranking factors. Let's thinking of them more as kind of like the levers that we can pull, where we can have some influence, right? Expertise. Are you demonstrating? Is your content demonstrating real depth and clarity and insight in the areas that you should own? Um, are you explaining things better than your competitor? This is where kind of a POV helps. You have a way to show up in multiple contexts, but also sort of raising the bar on your content and being clearer and more authoritative than the competitor. That's a place you can get ahead. Second, credibility. Who else is validating you? Are you being referenced and cited and talked about outside of the walls of your website? I mentioned PR before, but this is where those proof points, this is where your customers, this is where your comms team can come in and you can create a strategy together. This is more of a straight ahead content strategy play, right? Consistency. Are you showing up regularly with a coherent, recognizable voice and a perspective that influences the conversation, or are you just kind of publishing in spurts, right? We've all been there. But this is where having that content rhythm, having that cross-channel alignment with your content strategy becomes more critical. And then finally, this one's kind of the maddening one. Freshness is it's related to frequency, but are you contributing new thinking? Are you keeping your content actively relevant? And this is where updating things and evolving your point of view and your product sheets and your explainers really starts to matter and keep you in that conversation. And I think the other piece that's important about freshness is authority is not static. The target is kind of always going to be moving. Um, and I think I'll say, I can say it confidently, like what counts as proof now may shift as the AI gets better, right? There's going to be that kind of arms race of people trying to game the system, right? Trying to take some control. AI has a business interest in filtering out that noise. So I think the goalposts are going to continue to change, and we have to sort of account for that. Um, but yeah, I'm not here saying these are hacks, right? These are just behaviors. These are things that I say good brands do inherently. Um, so I think critically, when we talk about authority, really that last thing to really think about is it's not about a checklist. It's about holistic behavior. And again, as a brand guy, that makes a ton of sense to me. It makes a lot more sense to me, frankly, than sort of bending over backwards to wedge in keywords and stuff like that. So maybe I'm showing my bias here. Okay, here's another piece. This is sort of coming from the LinkedIn story. What did LinkedIn do to respond to this data that it saw? What they didn't do was hire, one GEO specialist, right? That was not the solve. What they did was they formed a cross-functional AI task force. Because as we've said, authority doesn't belong to one channel. It represents the sum total of your presence in the entire ecosystem, and all of these pieces have a part to play there, right? I think you can see how these sort of net out to what would make a brand trustworthy and credible in the market. And this is sort of the formula for how you are building those consistent signals everywhere your brand might show up, like from your paid media to your product team, from your PR to your brand communications. GEO is not a channel update. It's an operating model shift. I think that's how I would look at it. Okay, so that's a lot of information. Let's talk about some action. And again, I'm going to reiterate, this is not a Monday morning scramble, right? Start small, small smart steps that we can take now and execute consistently over time over the next few quarters and years are going to put you ahead of your competitors who are like freezing or overreacting or over indexing. So my recommendation and what I talk to my partners about when they ask me about this is where we need to start, putting pencil to paper is around things like planning, things like resourcing, understanding how we align all of those components of that GEO team that maybe aren't fully aligned currently. And, of course, to the best of your ability, don't panic. Um, get a little bit more tactical, like what are some things we might be able to do today? Um, Here's a couple of tips I would say. One, um, and these are things that are not radical departures from your existing content strategy, probably. So they shouldn't feel so disruptive. But take a fresh look at your existing content, not through the SEO lens, but through a lens of trust and clarity, right? And I think sometimes, frankly, SEO can butt right against trust and clarity and create some conflict there. But is the content that you have straightforward? Is it easy to understand? Is it genuinely helpful, right? Would a machine or a skeptical buyer see that and say, this brand knows what it's talking about, right? Um, and then sort of on the technical side, is your content on the back end machine readable? Does it have clear structure? Again, I mentioned this before. Do you have FAQs that are aligned with your buyer's real questions? Do you have some ungated assets that represent the best of your expertise that the AI can access? Yeah. Next would be buyer questions, right? Getting out of this, building content for keywords and getting more into building content for people who are trying to do things, right? The real questions that your buyers might have as they're beginning their buying journey, right? How do I do this? What's the difference between this and this? Is blank worth it, right? The human moments that we know our buyers have and that we know that your sales team understands uh, better than anybody, and let them be your asset. These are the queries that the AI agents they're actively synthesizing. They're scanning the whole ecosystem and trying to answer these questions on behalf of their users. And you want to be part of that answer. If your content doesn't speak to these moments, the AI is just going to surface somebody who does. And then next on top of that is look beyond your website. Authority, as we're talking about it, is built out in the open in the places that the people and AI are already looking for credible signals, not necessarily on a branded site, right? In interviews they read, in articles they read on, in their free time, podcasts they listen to, um, partner content that they consume, product reviews, citations and white papers, all that kind of stuff. So the goal we need to start to set for ourselves is to make expertise recognizable, our expertise recognizable anywhere it is encountered, and not just on our website when it has our logo next to it. And I think as a side conversation here, all this points to, I think, uh, the value of earned media increasing. I think we have the opportunity here because earned media is really founded on that idea of trust, right? Earned is right in the name. Um, I think this maybe will disrupt your balance between your resources and owned, earned, and paid, or at least will merit reconsideration how you allocate that. And then finally, start nudging your metrics forward, right? Move some of your attention away from page level behavior and start thinking about how can you understand these signals of trust and whether you are communicating them successfully. I shared a few earlier. Um, you know, it's new. We're not going to get it all perfect today, but even some desk research can give you some early indicators if you're on the right track. Um, and I'd say consider this all foundational work, not busy work, right? This is going to help you prepare. It's going to help you understand how your brand can achieve that goal of being consistently recognizable and trustworthy and retrievable in the GEO world. And ultimately, my thesis is at the end of the day, um, GEO is not a technology story, it's a trust story. So, right, if authority is the new visibility, brand is your engine that creates that authority. Um, we know the algorithms may change. Gosh, did we get a new Gemini and Perplexity today or something? I don't even know. I thought I'd read that. Yeah, the algorithms are going to change. The interfaces will evolve. Search behavior is going to keep shifting as people get more savvy and native to the AI environment. But what is not going to change is that people and the AI are going to surface the voices that they trust. Strong brands make that a lot easier. Strong brands are clear. They can be consistent. They have the infrastructure to be consistent. They have the ability to show up with a point of view in various contexts. They leave a trail of credibility, of credible signals across the ecosystem that the AI cannot ignore, and that's good. That's a good thing. Um, so yeah, I think if you want my take or leave it, brand strategy is the cornerstone to understanding how you build this more three-dimensional authority structure. Um, and I think if you are invested in your brand already, you're going to be in great shape and you're just connecting the dots. If your brand is maybe under-resourced, this might be another sort of part of your business case for getting that resources in on your brand side to ultimately, shore up this extremely important part of your top of funnel. Um, you know, your this investment's going to mean that I think ultimately you're not just going to survive the shift to GEO, you will thrive. You'll benefit from it because strong brands don't depend on the mechanics of search to stay visible. They sort of carry that visibility with them. Okay, that is the end of the me talking part.